Life is full of mysteries, perhaps none more compelling than those that lie within the confines of the human mind. Most of us perceive the outside world by virtue of the 5 known senses. But there are some people who claim they see the world through extrasensory channels. Do these strange powers of the mind truly exist? Can they be measured, tested, even harnessed? Or are they destined to remain beyond our grasp? We'll seek the answers to these and other questions as Reader's Digest's Mysteries of the Unexplained presents Powers of the Paranormal. In the middle of the night in the year 1700, the city fathers of a small French town went grave robbing. They intended to steal from the tomb of one Michel de Nostradam, better known as the prophet Nostradamus. According to legend, a document containing the secret to his extraordinary powers was buried with him in 1566. But Nostradamus himself had warned against disturbing his eternal sleep.
The man who opens the tomb when it is found, evil will come to him that no one will be able to prove.
A medallion is discovered. Inexplicably, it is engraved with the present date, the year 1700. 134 years earlier, Nostradamus had foreseen this, the moment of his desecration. Horrified, the robbers leave the prophet to his peace. Our desire to peer into the future is universal. It is the longing to command our destiny rather than be commanded by an unknown, impersonal fate. In every civilization, in every corner of the world, prophets have arisen and people have embraced their every word. Nostradamus himself followed a prophetic tradition at least as ancient as the Greeks. Certainly his rituals seem modeled after Brankas, one of the famed oracles of the great temple of Delphi. Seated by a smoking brazier, Brankas would conjure her visions of the future from the vapors in the air. But by the time of Nostradamus, those engaged in fortune-telling were thought blasphemous and malign. The so-called cunning men and wise women of the Middle Ages practiced their profession in secrecy and fear. The Catholic Church saw little difference between a soothsayer and a heretic. Indeed, the Inquisition doled out a similar fate to both. Prophets were arrested and burned at the stake. This was the climate of persecution in which Nostradamus practiced his strange arts. Indeed, his interest in magic, his ecstatic trances, his writings and predictions, all might have doomed a lesser man. But so renowned was the mastery of Nostradamus that the nobility was able to protect him from the Inquisition's wrath.
Nostradamus walked a tightrope between religious correctness of the 16th century and getting himself burned at the stake. He died in his bed, so he was a success at not upsetting the church authorities too much. But you've got to understand, in the 16th century, it was not so much that you were performing heresies, but if you were indiscreet about it.
Over 36,000 words of prophecy flowed from his pen. His epic work, The Centuries, holds more than 900 predictions about the future of the world. Nostradamus lived to see some of his prophecies fulfilled. The most famous concerned the death of the reigning monarch of France, Henry II. In 1556, he forewarned the king that he would be killed in a joust.
The prophecy described in detail what happened. This is what it said. The young lion and the old lion will meet in ritualized combat on the field of honor. And then he says, he shall have his eyes pierced through the golden cage.
Despite the warning, Henry entered a joust. His opponent's lance shattered as they clashed. The splintered shaft penetrated the golden visor of the king. 10 days later, he died. Nostradamus's prophecies are couched in 4-lined rhymed verses called quatrains. Written in an obscure and cryptic style, sprinkled with Hebrew, Latin, and Portuguese words, they are difficult to interpret. Some say his writings contain little more than fiction, but others claim the various verses foretold the Great Fire of London in 1666, details of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon and Hitler. Volume 9, Quatrain 90 declares,
In 1937, an infernal power will rise against the church. This shall be the second Antichrist.
The chilling accuracy of his predictions have ensured Nostradamus his place in history. But what of his predictions yet to come? Today, paranormal powers are making headlines. Some crimes that left law enforcement baffled seem to have been solved by psychics. Can they interpret clues and answer questions the rest of us cannot? The Reader's Digest decided to put together its own team of paranormal investigators to find out.
Sometimes you have to use alternative methods of investigation to point you in the right direction, and you have to keep an open mind as to all possibilities.
A little girl has been missing from her home in Rochester, New York for 2.5 years. The longer she is missing, the more surely chances of finding her decrease. Time is running out. We hired Nancy Meyer, a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She has helped solve more than 250 police investigations, all over the United States. She claims a success rate of 90%. Jim Wright has worked with Nancy Meyer before.
The important thing about working with Nancy was that she knew nothing about the case, and there were several instances where we had her on the scene of the crime that she was able to tell us specific details about the case that she would have no way of knowing. And also, she had done some work for us in the way of sketches of suspects and a murder weapon and so forth that we were able later to link up with some suspects.
My mind seems to be able to pick up a lot of information from photos of the crime scene. That's what I primarily use. Or If it's a missing person, I use photos, handwriting samples, maps to try, and then all of a sudden I'll lock in on some part of the situation that will tell me, this is what happened.
Meyer needs very little to begin her search for the missing girl. Just a map showing where the child was last seen, a photograph of the girl that clearly shows her eyes, and a personal belonging.
It's kind of like watching a movie editing session. It's, there's a piece here, there's a piece there. Some of it runs in a nice sequence, usually it doesn't. And trying to put the pieces together in a way that makes sense can be kind of mind-boggling. It's very fast. The images just fly through my mind.
Meyer has no prior knowledge of the case or the people involved.
She's a very friendly, outgoing kind of child, very open child. And I do feel that she had talked to him on at least 3 previous occasions, but nothing in detail.
There's going to be a 6-6 beast. And this beast is going to be the last empire that ruled Jerusalem.
Down through the centuries, the mantle of prophecy has been worn by countless men and women. A power claimed by many, it is a gift received by few. In our present century, those with an enduring reputation for prophecy are rare indeed. But one man's predictions have yet to be dismissed by history.
The earth will be broken up. The upper portion of Europe will be changed as in the twinkling of an eye. The greater portion of Japan must go into the sea.
His name is Edgar Cayce, an ordinary man, possessed by extraordinary abilities. Born in rural Kentucky in 1877, Cayce was a below-average student. Even his parents despaired at his inability to learn. But in 1890, all that would change. As young Edgar played baseball one afternoon, a ball hit him near the base of his spine. Cayce didn't seem seriously hurt, but when he went to bed and fell asleep, he began to speak. Cayce's words were not the ramblings of a fevered brain, but precise medical instructions aimed at effecting his own cure. His prescription called for a poultice of cornmeal, onions, and herbs to be applied to his neck. His amazed parents did as they were told. The following morning, all signs of Cayce's injury had gone. It seems he had just delivered his first psychic reading. By the time he was in his 30s, Cayce was regularly dictating medical treatments and prophecies. His method was always the same. Falling into a trance-like sleep, he began to speak out loud. An assistant would transcribe his words. Upon waking, Cayce would remember nothing. He became known throughout the Western world as America's sleeping prophet. Among his most accurate predictions, the stock market crash of 1929, the timing and duration of World War II, the death in office of John F. Kennedy. True to his unassuming nature, Cayce never thought himself unique. He believed that everyone could develop psychic powers. In one remarkable reading, Cayce strayed from prophecy and gave instructions on how to read another's mind.
First begin between selves. Set a definite time, and each at that moment put down what the other is doing. do this 20 days. You shall find you have the key to telepathy.
But if telepathy still seems beyond our grasp, can we emulate Casey by harnessing other powers? Can we, as Edgar Casey claimed, learn to receive messages from the future? According to a recent study, dreams are the most frequently reported vehicle for psychic experiences. Researcher Alan Vaughn believes in prophetic dreams.
I think everyone should realize that we have this extraordinary potential within us to dream about the future. And this is part of our guidance mechanism. This is what helps people create success, either through their dreams, or often people will have, shall we call it, waking visions or hunches or intuitions of things that will work out for them.
Vaughn bases his belief on personal experience. In April of 1968, he began to have a series of strange and disturbing dreams. It was an election year. U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy was campaigning for the Democratic nomination for president. Over the next few weeks, as Kennedy gained momentum, Vaughn's dreams grew more vivid, his sense of an evil premonition stronger. The campaign was now in high gear. As the crucial California primary approached, Bobby Kennedy was looking good in the polls.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you.
May 25th, I woke up with a dream in which Robert Kennedy was being shot. In the dream, he was walking with some young people, walking down a hallway, and they were planning to go to a party. It was at night, and suddenly there were shots fired.
Vaughn tried to get a message through to the Kennedy campaign, to no avail. Just 10 days after the dream, on the night of his victory in California, Robert Kennedy was assassinated.
On June the 5th, when I heard the news that Robert Kennedy had been shot, it was the most horrible feeling I've ever had in my life. It was like I was guilty. It was my fault because I had not been successful in warning him. But as the news came in, I was able to compare it with the dreams, and there were a dozen points of correspondence. From a parapsychological point of view, this was really good evidence.
Could this tragedy have been averted? Might a better understanding of the hidden workings of the mind give us the power to shape destiny and fate? For the last 70 years, an American research institute has sought to answer questions such as these. The Rhine Institute of Parapsychology is in Durham, North Carolina. Its director is Dr. Richard Broughton. He's convinced that there is a scientific basis for prophecy and other extrasensory powers.
My feeling is that if ESP is a human ability, then by definition, we all have it to some degree. You know, we all have intelligence of some degree, but we all can't, get PhDs. So it is something we all have, but we're going to see very large differences in terms of how people can deploy it, how people can use it in their daily lives.
Broughton's convictions are based on the longest and most rigorous series of scientific studies ever conducted in the area of ESP. The Institute's founder, Dr. J.B. Rhine, was determined to put the new science of parapsychology onto a scientific footing. To test the psychic ability of his subjects, Rhine used a specially designed deck of cards called Zener cards. The symbols on the cards were selected because they were easy to remember and of roughly equal visual weight. Carefully shielded from the tester, Rhine's subjects were asked to state the precise sequence in which the cards had been drawn from the pack. His star pupil was Hubert Pierce. On one occasion, Ryan offered Pierce $100 for every correct guess he made. He successfully predicted a 25-card sequence and pocketed $2,500, defeating odds of about 300 trillion to 1. By the 1970s, Zener cards were no longer used to measure the mind's influence on chance events. Computers had replaced them. Meanwhile, Ryan turned his attention to remote viewing, the ability to visualize an object or event from far away.
Remote viewing is just a different name for extrasensory perception, but when it's directed at distant locations. But it's a kind of ESP where there's a sort of general free response on the part of the subject to describe whatever he or she is seeing.
We all have the ability to imagine pictures in our minds, but remote viewers can visualize reality. Remote viewing offers the most practical value of all psychic skills and is frequently put to the test. In the most simple experiments, a subject is isolated in a room and is asked to describe a photograph outside the room. Despite having never seen the photograph, the remote viewer then tries to visualize the image in his mind. Under perfect conditions, such photographs have been described in minute detail. But some people claim they can bring these mental images into focus under almost any circumstances. Joe McMonigle, the most renowned remote viewer in the United States, believes he can remote view on demand. The class of students at the Rhine Institute will watch McMonigle as he demonstrates his skill. A computer has randomly selected the target image from a library of hundreds. It has been sealed in an envelope and placed in a separate room.
Generally, when I begin a remote view, I'm looking at the fragmentary or bits and pieces that are coming in very rapidly and trying to create some picture out of that. These first elements come in very fragmented form. They come in symbology a lot of times. Like one of the things I'm getting is this sort of symbol. That doesn't actually represent anything, but what it does mean is it's probably a reflective surface of some kind.
McMonigle uses a kind of visual shorthand to describe the images he sees in his mind. He visualizes elements of the photograph by broad characteristics, like shape, color, and size.
With a major fall off or drop. The important thing about this consolidation is not to assume that the reflection is water or that this drop off is a waterfall or anything like that. You don't want to make any of those assumptions.
Most psychics experience a similar jumble of images when attempting to remote view. Putting the pieces together can be difficult. McMonigle's completed vision describes an image with a shadowed area in the upper right, some structures on the left side, a reflective surface on the bottom right, and a drop-off in the middle. In this case, Joe's remote viewing is judged to be a direct hit. We were so impressed by McMonigle's remote viewing skills that we asked him to join the Reader's Digest investigative team. Joe McMonigle's experience as a psychic investigator includes 25 criminal cases. He claims his crime-solving record is 60% successful. McMonigle is now set up to remote view in his home in Charlottesville, Virginia. For a remote viewer, it's much harder to find a missing person than to identify an object or a location.
You can develop some very detailed drawings of the location that a person might be held in, or the location of, say, a missing body or something. But the problem is, even with a detailed drawing, let's say it was a drawing of a trailer park. There are how many trailer parks in America?
He needs the date and time the little girl disappeared, nothing else. McMoneagle has been given no information about the case, but at least one of his predictions will prove true.
She was playing on a bike at the time, or had her bicycle with her. I get a sense that she probably lost part of her clothing, a shoe or a sock or something. She was taken by force. She didn't have any idea who her kidnappers were.
One more facet of Joe McMoneagle's biography must be mentioned. He's a graduate of the most remarkable program in the history of American espionage. Joe was a remote viewer for the CIA.
Mr. Joseph McMoneagle received a Legion of Merit Award, which was given in part for providing invaluable information with a novel intelligence gathering technique, which was briefed at the highest levels of the executive and congressional branches of our government.
In the throes of the Cold War, the CIA received alarming information that the Soviet Union was turning to parapsychology as a source of exotic espionage. Convinced that the Soviets were dangerously far ahead in the strategic use of psychic powers, the United States retaliated. In 1972, at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Operation Stargate was born. A team of U.S. government psychics spent 20 years and $20 million visualizing everything from the identity of KGB agents to the design of top-secret enemy submarines. In 1980, the CIA's psychics were asked to find out where Iranian terrorists were holding American hostages. And after the U.S. invaded Panama in 1989, psychics were enlisted to provide information about fugitive President Manuel Noriega. They were asked to provide a layout of the interior of Noriega's home. The psychics delivered a top-secret report showing both the rooms and their contents. Finally, in 1995, the CIA went public.
There was large media attention when the CIA finally announced their findings, and ESP and the use of it in the government are ripe for ridicule. Our project, however, really survives best with responsible criticism. We enjoy skeptics. In fact, if we can't find them, we'll hire them from somewhere if they don't volunteer. We want skepticism because we improve our product, we learn more about what's going on.
More recently, the Stargate program was terminated. Despite some promising results, it was considered too unreliable for military use. After years of research, ESP remains an enigmatic power.
My feeling is that this anomalous information, extrasensory perception, comes and goes and serves similar needs to creativity. And we certainly can recognize great creativity in poetry or art, but it's very spontaneous. You cannot take a creative person and stick them in an artificial environment and say, make a masterpiece. It doesn't work like that.
The story behind our psychic investigation is a tragic one. Judy Gifford is suffering the pain of an experience that is every parent's nightmare. It was early evening on a beautiful spring day. Her 4-year-old daughter, Kaylee, was getting in one last ride around the block before dinner. It seemed like any other Monday. Judy picked up Kaylee after work. It was around 7 p.m. that she last saw her little girl. As the clock keeps ticking, Judy is desperate to find Kaylee. She's open to using psychic detectives to help.
Maybe they can see something that somebody inside is not being able to see, like the forest through the trees kind of scenario. Maybe our police department are looking at things and not being able to see the answer. Maybe an outsider can come in and see something that they can't.
All over metropolitan Rochester, on the southern shore of Lake Ontario, Kaylee's photograph has been distributed. Her smiling face is everywhere.
You know what it feels as though someone rips your heart out while it's still beating in their hand. Because that's what I felt like. Someone just stole my life, which is my child.
Remote viewing may be gaining credibility, but other paranormal powers seem more improbable. And psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with the power of the mind, may deserve our skepticism. If such a power exists, the laws of physics will have to be rewritten. As for the rules of the game of pool, they'll certainly never be the same. One person who achieved fame overnight with his supposed psychokinetic talents was Uri Geller.
5 degrees, I moved. What are you saying to yourself?
I'm saying now bend.
The controversial Israeli claims to have been employing paranormal powers since he first bent his soup spoon at the age of 4.
I sort of reserve judgment about Mr. Geller and his spoon bending. I've never worked with him. It's the kind of thing where scientists generally like to stay out of the stage magician's craft, because stage magicians will always have the better of scientists, no matter how well trained they may be.
Yes, look, it's becoming there.
Geller has been widely accused of fraud. Critics say he weakens the metal he claims to bend beforehand, or distracts the audience's attention, giving him time to switch one spoon for another.
Touch it, there's absolutely no heat. Is that solid silver, Lord Bath?
Yeah, made by Gerrard's in London.
Among the skeptics is Richard Wiseman, an expert on the art of deception. He makes his living uncovering psychic fraud.
Often psychics are very opportunistic. They'll walk into a situation not quite knowing what they're going to do. They'll look around, they'll exploit the moments when everyone's attention drops, or suddenly everyone's looking in a particular direction. Perhaps they'll tweak a spoon and leave it on the table bent, and then 10 minutes later say, hold on, I'm concentrating on bending a spoon, can anyone see one that's bent? That sort of thing.
But here in Paris, we found a man who claims genuine psychokinetic powers. We decided to put him to the test. His name is Jean-Pierre Girard. In the 1970s, he rode the coattails of Uri Geller's fame, baffling audiences with his alleged ability to move solid objects with the power of his mind. But like Uri Geller, Girard was widely accused of fraud. Eventually, he dropped out of the limelight.
Demonstrations are often too flashy and done without scientific supervision. I rarely do demonstrations for the media. For the last 20 years, I've been doing mainly experiments in laboratories in a strictly controlled scientific environment.
Je vais simplement demander à Jean-Pierre Girard de se laver les mains très consciencieusement.
Today, Girard has agreed to demonstrate his abilities under one condition: that a properly controlled testing environment be provided. A French magician named Ranqui is Girard's monitor. He is president of a French association that is often called upon to investigate claims of paranormal occurrences. As a magician, Ranqui is familiar with all the tricks and illusions someone claiming psychokinetic powers could use to fool an audience.
An illusionist is the person best suited to uncover fraud. Absolutely, all paranormal phenomena can be reproduced using illusion. That is to say, I can bend an iron bar, move an object, or do any of those sort of things, but I use magic tricks to do it.
A glass table is set up so Gerard's hands are visible at all times. Ranqui has personally chosen and closely inspected the metal bars Gerard will try to bend. Each is labeled with a different number to prevent Gerard from switching bars during the demonstration. The 10 bars are made from a non-magnetic metal alloy. They are 10 millimeters in diameter and 25 centimeters in length. We watched as Gerard went to work. Approximately 10 minutes into the demonstration, the metal bar he held began to bend. At first, the bowing of the rod was minimal, but Gerard continued to work, taking breaks between each exertion. After 3 sessions, he had successfully bent a straight metal bar by 30 degrees.
This is the first time I've seen an effect happen so quickly. Jean-Pierre Girard presents us a problem without a solution. I'm unable to explain. Even though I was right there, I cannot explain. I don't think any other musician could explain what he has done.
But Richard Wiseman, who has performed hundreds of experiments with people claiming psychokinetic powers, remains unconvinced.
I would love to see a miracle. I would love to meet a genuine psychic. And people often say, well, given all your negative results, don't you become very cynical? Don't you think you're wasting your time? But the fact is that at the end of the day, you know, I would love someone to come through and prove us wrong.
As our psychic investigation continues, 2 competing visions emerge.
Can't get past this feeling that she knows this guy because she's so trusting of him. I have the feeling that he took her in a mid-sized car. I get the feeling that it was a Buick LeSabre and it was kind of a metallic blue.
The van that was used in the kidnapping was sort of an off-white with gold markings or stripes, and it was stolen.
He has sedated her in some way. I would think logically chloroform, but I don't smell that, so it's something else. But he's knocked her out.
I have the van departing the area by accessing a 4-lane interstate road, and that was essentially going south.
He's heading south on 490, and he goes about 5.5 to 6 miles, and he bears off an exit to the right.
Really didn't take her with the intent of keeping her. She was delivered somewhere else.
He sexually assaulted this child, and in the process of doing that, she was asphyxiated.
I have a sense that she's still alive.
Some physical phenomena cannot be explained without reference to psychic power.
This is a quick and very dangerous thing, and it's very powerful. Turns a lot of terror and fear into real high excitement.
Overcoming fear and conquering the colds is seen as a powerful and life-transforming ritual.
It's a metaphor for personal transformation, personal power. People can see the possibilities for themselves, that they can do more than they think they're capable of doing.
Here in a friend's backyard near Seattle, Washington, Michael McDermott regularly organizes firewalking ceremonies. Firewalking has been adopted by several New Age groups. It's also used as a motivational tool in self-help seminars.
I tell people to pay attention to their intention, because we create everything in our lives from what our intention is. If we're clear on that intention, then we can create what we want to create, if we know what it is we want.
McDermott is absolutely focused when he firewalks. Everything but the fire disappears. It's a state of mind that parallels the trance states found in many cultures.
There's Hindu and Tibetan Buddhist firewalkers, and also the Native American traditions. Of course, there are examples even of firewalking in the Bible.
The very fact that some people apparently are able to go through the ceremonies and not suffer harm gives us the exciting possibility that whatever this capacity, whatever this potential is, it lies within all of us.
While there are many modern examples of trance-induced states, they pale by comparison with the altered states of consciousness seen in traditional cultures. Trance states, whether for prophecy, healing, or mind over matter, seem to be a universal feature of psychic power.
The ethnographic record leaves absolutely no doubt that in most societies of the world, the desire to invoke some technique of ecstasy, to soar away on the wings of trance, to get into some kind of distant metaphysical realm, is an essential part of the human desire. It happens everywhere, in 100 different forms.
The desire for such transcendence seems strongest in the East. In the Himalayan lands of India, Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan, people have long practiced the ancient techniques of yoga and meditation. Indian holy men, also known as sadhus, may spend years in quiet contemplation. Remarkably, some seem able to override the laws of physics and biology with the power of their minds. To explore the mysterious powers of the meditating mind, a Harvard University medical team undertook a series of expeditions into northern India in the 1980s. The expedition leader was cardiologist Dr. Herbert Benson. Benson's team came well prepared. They wanted to ensure that any phenomena they witnessed could be scientifically validated. Their equipment allowed for accurate measurements of stress levels, heart rate, and body temperature. With the blessings of the Dalai Lama, Dr. Benson became the first Westerner to study the previously secret rituals of Tummo Yoga.
We went to the experts, Tibetan monks who were, in legend, allegedly able to dry icy wet sheets on their naked bodies, to melt snow around them, to do competitions. Those who melted the greatest amount of snow would win the competition.
In an unheated chamber of a monastery with snow on the ground outside, the monks began their meditation. Wrapping their near-naked bodies in soaking wet sheets, they seek to invoke a spiritual heat against the freezing cold. First, they bring themselves into a quiet state of meditation. Then they visualize heat coming from the outside and entering their bodies, radiating up and down a central channel. For the monks, this heat is a spiritual energy that burns away the defilements of improper thinking. The natural response of the human body to extreme cold is uncontrollable shivering. Yet the monks do not shiver. In fact, within 5 minutes, the monks are generating so much body heat that the sheets begin to steam. Dr. Benson has discovered these monks can raise their body temperature at will by as much as 17 degrees. Within a half hour, the sheets are completely dry.
Well, this is a perfect example of a mind-body effect that we would think would previously be impossible. That through thoughts, the body could generate enough heat to actually dry icy wet sheets on your naked body in 40-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It's remarkable.
On one occasion, Benson's team hiked to an exposed ledge at 19,000 feet. They observed a group of monks spend the night in sub-zero temperatures with only thin shawls for protection. Their mastery of Tummo Yoga allowed them to survive unharmed. The monks provide absolute proof of the mind's ability to control the body. But how does it work? Back at Harvard University's Mind-Body Institute, Dr. Benson and his researchers are able to secure precise measurements of the physiological effects of meditation. In repeated experiments, they have demonstrated that different states of mind produce detectably different electrochemical signatures. In particular, during the practice of meditation, a unique brainwave pattern dominates the electrical activity of the brain. According to Benson, the significance of such physiological changes is enormous. They're the indicator for a healing power that all of us possess.
What we now know is that if you think in a certain way, your metabolism will decrease, your blood pressure will decrease, there's decreased heart rate, decreased rate of breathing, and feelings of peace and tranquility. There is nothing new about what we're talking, whether it be repetitive prayer, a rosary in Catholicism, davening in Judaism, centering prayer in Protestantism, or yoga, or meditation. They all evoke the same physiologic changes.
The power of healing is in everyone's grasp. Many Western doctors remain skeptical about the role of the mind in medicine. But their doubts are eroding in the face of mounting evidence that the human immune system is regulated by our state of mind. The body's healing system is far more powerful and complex than we ever dared imagine. The mind has many ways to influence the body. Don Copland is the former president of the National Federation of Spiritual Healers in the United Kingdom. Spiritual healers believe they can assist the body's own recuperative efforts and help return a patient to good health.
I'm acting as a channel for a healing energy which we believe comes from a divine source, and channeling that energy to Eileen for the restoration of her energy system so that we can try and fight this problem that she's got, this deep problem. Just quiet yourself down as usual.
Yeah.
Don't have anything crossed. Just think of something peaceful in your mind.
Eileen was diagnosed with liver cancer in December. Doctors gave her 3 months to live. She began chemotherapy with little hope of recovery. 2 months later, out of desperation, Eileen went to see Don Copland. She continued chemotherapy.
I suppose I was skeptic, not knowing quite what went on, and basically I think I was so petrified of dying, having been told that I'd got months to live, and I was really, really frightened of that. And Don talking to me each and every week has taken the fear away.
Once Eileen is relaxed, Copland goes over her body with his hands, pausing on areas where the ailment originates. He says he's transferring healing energy into her body. This thermal imaging camera shows heat variation. White signifies the warmest areas. Red, yellow, green, and blue indicate progressively cooler temperatures.
I feel a heat, and when he does hands on my stomach, I mean, I really feel then as if I'm on fire.
I'm very, very fortunate that someone upstairs has selected me to be a channel, to be able to do this. And over the last 20 years, many hundreds of people have been very glad of that facility.
After only 4 months of healing sessions with Copland, Eileen's tumor had shrunk so much that she ceased chemotherapy. As of today, Eileen's cancer has been in remission for a year. Her doctor requires only occasional visits. Psychics Nancy Meyer and Joe McMonigal have drawn very different conclusions about what happened to Kaylee Polton. Meyer believes the missing child is dead. Joe thinks she's still alive. Unfortunately, just 10 days after our visit to Rochester, Meyer was proved correct.
We have just learned that, in fact, there is a suspect in custody in the disappearance of Kaylee Ann Polton. Unfortunately, the little girl has been murdered.
2.5 years after she disappeared, the body of Kaylee Polton was found in a factory water tank on the outskirts of the city of Rochester. A suspect led police to her body after confessing to the killing. The suspect in custody lived in Kaylee's apartment complex, and she knew him.
She was not afraid of him, not wary of him at all. So he must have been either living in her immediate area or was hanging out in that area for several weeks prior to this abduction.
The suspect drove a blue Chevrolet to dump her body.
I get the feeling that it was a Buick LeSabre, and it was kind of a metallic blue.
Kaylee Polton was strangled to death.
She was asphyxiated.
The evidence for paranormal powers is compelling. The source may be mysterious, their manifestations irregular, but remarkable abilities do exist.
It may be something that's really evolving along with consciousness. Consciousness in the human species seems to be relatively recent. Maybe extrasensory powers are something that is evolving along with those, and we've yet to just understand them.
500 years ago, Nostradamus risked the anger of the church to practice his rituals of prophecy. Today, the psychic abilities of Joe McMonigal have received the sanction of the CIA. A dramatic shift in attitudes has certainly occurred. But perhaps a more fundamental transformation is also taking place. The evolution of the paranormal powers of our minds. The search for new life forms extends to the invisible edge of the universe. It is a quest to solve the greatest mystery of all. Are we alone? Even as scientists listen for signals of intelligence from beyond our galaxy, here on planet Earth, a search of another kind begins. In Northern California, investigators look for evidence of a man-ape that's still unclassified by science. Our quest for strange creatures takes us to the four corners of the globe, and finally, beyond the limits of the Earth. In the skies above Belgium, a high-speed UFO encounter leads to a stunning announcement. Just how close have we come to extraterrestrial contact? Victims of alleged alien abductions tell us of ordeals that can last for a lifetime. And now, the search for answers begins as Reader's Digest's Mysteries of the Unexplained presents Strange Beings and UFOs. This is a man with a mission to prove or disprove the existence of a legendary creature. This is a cast of its gigantic footprint. Jeff Meldrum, a primate anatomist, is one of a handful of investigators around the world studying these extraordinary clues. From these tracks and some 1,500 U.S. sightings comes a profile of what some call a monster, and others a missing link. Its height is estimated at between 6 and 8 feet. Its weight between 280 and 700 pounds. The Indians of the Northwest call the creature Sasquatch. We call it Bigfoot.
People sometimes ask, could a Bigfoot track simply be a big human foot? And the answer is quite simply no, that there are very significant differences between the two. For example, the foot is basically much flatter than is a human footprint. There's no discernible arch as is found in a human footprint. There are also differences in the way in which the foot moves. In a more ape-like foot, there is greater flexibility through the instep. And I've seen this feature consistently demonstrated in a number of tracks from a number of different and very diverse situations.
New tracks have arrived at Meldrum's lab, along with a home video from a fishing guide named Rich Gear.
Okay, first one, we're going to cast that one. And there's another one right there that's been stepped on by a dog. There's another cast right there. We're headed towards the creek at this point.
A long-time tracker of Bigfoot, Gear had come well prepared. He made casts of the footprints before following them deeper into the woods.
Something moved, and then I looked. And there was another down log 30, 40 foot away on the side of the hill, and staring me, sort of bent over, kind of like a linebacker in a football game, head kind of hunched back, looking down around the corner at me, was this furry creature.
According to Gear, the creature then fled into the forest. As it did, it left behind a few strands of body hair.
Okay. How wild. This is unreal.
Gear sent them along to Meldrum for analysis.
He just pulled some more up.
Sasquatch hair samples have been found throughout the Northwest. Meldrum will have these examined at the university's lab.
Hello, is this Rich Gear? Yes, this is Jeff Meldrum calling. Yes, I received your package. Yes, it received,
Meldrum will soon visit the heart of Bigfoot country to meet Rich Gear as the search for nature's most elusive creature continues.
In fact, a colleague of mine and myself would like to come out and...
Many centuries ago, no one doubted the reality of monsters, or that a maiden sacrifice might quench their bloody thirst. Much more than creatures of the imagination, they were dragons to be slain. Strangest of all these fierce and fabled beasts was the griffin. With the head of an eagle and the body of a lion with wings, it was a creature that struck terror in the hearts of men. Across the ancient world, people believed griffins were very real man-eating monsters. Researcher Adrienne Mayer now believes she knows why.
Legends of monsters often arise in fossil-rich areas. One good example from antiquity is the griffin. The legend began when Greeks made contact with nomads who mined for gold in the vast deserts of Central Asia.
By word of mouth, the myth traveled west along ancient caravan routes.
As more and more Greeks began to go east toward China over these caravan routes to trade for gold, they brought back more and more reports.
The ancient nomads mined for gold in a region rich with fossil remains of dinosaurs. Centuries later, when fossil hunters journeyed to the Gobi Desert, they recovered 2,000 tons of fossils from one species alone, Protoceratops. It's easy to see how this real dinosaur inspired the fable of the griffin. The large nostril holes in the fossil skull of Protoceratops were assumed to be its eyes. And in the medieval mind, the beak and claws of a dinosaur became the wings and talons of a monster. Finally, a myth that endured for centuries can now be put to rest. The search for Bigfoot continues.
Well, I've spoken to Rich Gear, who sent me the videotape and casts and other materials. He's found a camp for us here, right about there.
In Orleans, California, Jeff Meldrum is joined by Richard Greenwell of the International Society of Cryptozoology in Tucson, Arizona.
As a cryptozoologist, my job is to, well, first evaluate claims, reports of what we call unverified animals and see if we can verify them. And of course, right here in California, we look for Bigfoot. I'm hopeful that this is a real biological phenomenon, we could call it. It's going to be pretty significant for zoology as well as anthropology and as well as society, I think.
The team's first objective is to follow up on Rich Gear's recent Bigfoot sighting. A seasoned forest guide, Gear will donate a few days of his time to help them search for new Bigfoot tracks.
Rich Gear, how you doing? Been doing a little scouting around here, and just not too far over the hill is where the actual Patterson sighting was, and there's a nice little sandbar there, and possibly, you know, we might see some things that might get exciting.
You filming your camera, Richard?
Yeah, let's
Hey.
If these investigators do find Bigfoot, it won't be the first time a myth has inspired the search and discovery of a real creature.
Here's an example of a bear paw, probably a black bear, a real big black bear. And we see the paw mark here, but we haven't seen the bear. And it's kind of the case with Bigfoot. You do see the footprints, but you don't see the Sasquatch itself.
But we can see real clearly that...
When we return to the search for Bigfoot, Meldrum and Greenwell will visit a place where Sasquatch left more than a footprint. The search for real monsters has led explorers to the far corners of the world. In Asia, the dragon is a symbol of creation and destruction. But was it always just a metaphor, a sign? In this century, the word dragon would take on an entirely new dimension. In 1926, a wealthy American adventurer named W. Douglas Burden made a 15,000-mile journey to Indonesia. Burden was lured to a volcanic island called Komodo by native reports of large and ferocious lizards. As Burden pushed into the unexplored jungles, the island of Komodo seemed like a lost world. After several days of exploration, he set up camp on a 2,000-foot plateau. It was there he encountered a monster forgotten by time. These are the world's first images of the Komodo dragon. Burden could scarcely believe his eyes.
It is a real dragon, black as dead lava, whose every aspect speaks of infinite existence.
The saliva of the Komodo dragon is so laden with poisonous bacteria, one bite from this monster can be fatal. Komodo dragons weighing it at over 500 pounds can overpower wild pigs and water buffalo. They've also killed and eaten human beings. Burden's film provided indisputable proof that his Komodo dragons were real. But half a world away, a single still photograph would trigger a monster controversy that continues to this day. In 1934, an English surgeon named Robert Kenneth Wilson stunned the world with a picture taken from the shores of a lake in Scotland. For decades, witnesses here reported a giant beast swimming in the deep waters of Loch Ness. Wilson claimed to have captured an image of the monster in broad daylight. The photograph was a profile of a huge creature that looked like a dinosaur. Nicknamed Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, provoked claims of fraud by some scientists, but was hailed as a breakthrough by believers. Recently, in a deathbed confession, a man who claimed to be part of the famous sighting insisted the entire episode was an elaborate hoax. He claimed the celebrated image captured not the likeness of a monster, but a small wooden model attached to a toy submarine. Wilson himself never recanted his claim. Many researchers continue to believe that Nessie is real. Today, we'd like to think we have conquered our fear of monsters of the deep. A cruise on the ocean is little more than a summer diversion, a chance to get away from it all. But buried in our primal hearts, the fear of what lies below haunts us still. The ocean's depths are alien territory, a place where nightmares do come true. The farther we fall into the abyss, the darker and the colder the visions. Logic vanishes, and suddenly we spy the faint outline of a monster.
I think we need monsters. I think we need scary, uncontrollable creatures in the sea or out of the sea, for that matter, to give us the proper sense of humility, to demonstrate to us that we're not really in charge of this planet and we can't do whatever it is we want.
Richard Ellis is the author of several books on the search for new life forms in the sea, many illustrated with his own paintings.
The ocean is the largest single environment on the planet, and the largest part of that single environment is the deep ocean. 90% of that is 2 miles deep. So, every once in a while, some mysterious creature is found. Most of the time they're small, occasionally they're large, but there could be almost anything down there that we simply haven't seen.
Scientists thought the coelacanth had been extinct for 70 million years. Then in 1938, the fish was found. Here was a fossil suddenly brought to life. In 1982, a U.S. Naval Research sub dove on volcanic vents a mile and a half below the Pacific. They discovered tube-like alien animals who thrive without oxygen or light in temperatures of 500 degrees Fahrenheit. While these new finds intrigue Richard Ellis, the monster that's captured his imagination remains elusive.
The giant squid is the most impressive creature on Earth, I think. The largest invertebrate in the world is a creature that gets to be 60 feet long, that has eyes the size of dinner plates, that has a beak, a gigantic beak shaped like that of a parrot. In addition to that, it is a gigantic animal that has never been seen alive by any human being. And that, I think, adds tremendously to its mystery.
There is also an element of fear. Giant squid have preyed upon human beings. In 1873, a huge squid attacked 3 fishermen off the coast of Newfoundland. When the creature lashed out with a tentacle, one of the crewmen managed to hack it off with an axe. The fishermen not only escaped with their lives, they also got away with the squid's tentacle, absolute proof of the existence of a true monster of the sea. Recently, the dead body of this giant was hauled aboard an Australian fishing boat. If a beast like this attacked the diver, resistance would be futile. This creature's tentacles are nearly 40 feet long.
And the largest one ever measured was 57 feet long. It washed up in New Zealand in 1948. So we know they get to be that big. Do they get to be any bigger? Maybe.
So far, no one has captured a giant squid alive. But anyone who tries had best be well prepared. Dr. Hanlon studies squid here at the Marine Biological Laboratory on Cape Cod. These squid are only a fraction of the size of their giant cousins, but their stalking techniques are probably the same.
So you're 1,000 feet down, total darkness. You come into the range, the visual range of a giant squid. What happens?
It recognizes you as prey, it detects you, orients towards you, and all of a sudden out shoot these long tentacles. Whap! And it's got you.
Slow motion photography can only hint at the horrors awaiting a diver confronted by a giant squid. Marine researchers hope to find and capture a giant squid in the near future. Until then, Richard Ellis will have to paint his monster from the imagination rather than life. Medford Taylor is a photographer for National Geographic magazine. 10 years ago, he crossed paths with a creature that haunts a world of stone and ice. It was 1985. The first joint Soviet-American mountain climbing expedition was in its second week. Americans and Russians were scaling a series of peaks in the Pamir Mountains of present-day Tajikistan. The story was covered by National Geographic, and Medford Taylor was sent to capture the adventure on film.
Up until this point, I was rather cynical about stories that I'd heard of Bigfoot and Nessie and other such monster stories. And after actually experiencing an incident like this, I began to question my own disbelief. It was during a lull between climbs that I hiked out from the camp some 2-3 kilometers alone to photograph flowers and fauna around the area. And in one of these valleys, late on an afternoon, I came upon this very large footprint, seemingly by a human of some sort, but not one of any size I'd ever encountered.
This is the first time Medford Taylor's photos of the footprint have been revealed to the world.
Not only did I photograph the footprint, but the more I looked at this footprint, the more I realized that I was seeing something strange, something I'd never seen before. This chill came over me. It was cold. It was always cold in that desolate valley, and there was always a slight wind blowing. But even beyond that, I felt this chill. There was obviously some other being around me in this place.
Taylor is certain he was not hoaxed. He had told no one in the base camp where he intended to hike that fateful day.
All I know is that I took the photographs, they're real, and I suppose when people don't understand the reason for something, they walk away from it. And so I suppose for that reason, I put the pictures away in my own file for the last 10 years, and there they've sat. But I still don't have an answer to this.
Unexplained footprints and sightings of ape-like creatures are not confined to Asia. Evidence has been found in many North American states and Canadian provinces. The most frequent reports come from British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California.
I get asked quite often if I believe in Sasquatch, in Bigfoot, and my answer is usually, and has to continue to be for now, is on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I believe in Bigfoot. And on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I don't. And on Sundays, I rest.
Right, it's beautiful here. Yeah, vegetation's really lush.
You know, pretty hard to find tracks here.
Of all the Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest, none have matched the incident at Bluff Creek, California. In 1967, two men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, were determined to bring back proof once and for all that Sasquatch existed. That October, they mounted an expedition to Bluff Creek, a site where scores of footprints have been reported. As they explored the creek bed for tracks, their horses were suddenly spooked. Gimlin stayed behind, but Patterson grabbed his Super 8 camera and raced toward the ape-like form squatting beside the creek. This is the actual scene Patterson shot in 1967. A few seconds of film of what he and Gimlin swore was a living and breathing Sasquatch. Jeff Meldrum believes that if the film is a hoax, it would have required a sophisticated knowledge of primate anatomy, something that Patterson did not possess.
The subject of the Patterson film, for example, walks with a very bent-kneed gait. He's walking very flat-footed. There's a lot of overlap in support between the two limbs.
Another feature that intrigues Meldrum is the way the creature swivels its entire upper body. It's the same way great apes with thick upper necks have to move when looking back in mid-stride.
So the fact that all of these features act in concert, and each time I see the film, new things sort of come to the surface, keeps bringing me back to the film to study it more and more.
Soon, the team will break off their search for Bigfoot. Meldrum is anxious to return to Idaho to learn the results of the lab tests on the Bigfoot hair samples recovered by Rich Gere. In the meantime, they know that just beyond the firelight, the very creature they seek could be watching them. Far above the realm of Bigfoot lies another frontier. New life forms beyond imagination await us in the endless space we call the cosmos. When life is found on this infinite carpet of stars, the discovery will dominate the future of our species. Today, public opinion polls indicate more and more people believe in alien encounters. Witnesses on every continent have reported strange objects in the skies. unidentified flying objects that defy conventional explanation. But most scientists maintain that alien civilizations would never consider space travel as a means of contact.
This doesn't sound like the kind of thing that a smart alien intelligence would do.
Dr. Paul Horowitz is a Harvard physicist.
The cost of a round trip to the nearest star, using technology we could not conceive of actually building, but which is permitted by the laws of physics, would use $200 billion worth of fuel, would use the U.S. power consumption for 1 million years. I think perhaps the most diplomatic thing one can say is the laws of physics do not prohibit space travel, but the laws of economics, in some sense, really do.
But proponents of extraterrestrial contact point to a variety of evidence. Photographs of UFOs have been investigated by a host of researchers. And UFOs have been tracked by radar operators who know the difference between weather phenomena and something solid. Richard Hall is chairman of the Fund for UFO Research, a group composed of PhDs from various scientific fields.
The United States does not take UFOs seriously currently. However, there are certain countries like France and China, mainland China, and particularly Belgium, that have had many sightings and do take the subject seriously. In 1990, there were a whole series of radar visual sightings over Belgium involving state-of-the-art jet interceptors, multiple radars. None of this could be explained.
In 1990, the Belgian Defense Ministry, through radar and visual observation, confirmed an outbreak of UFO sightings. At one point, Air Force fighters were sent to intercept the UFOs, which were simultaneously tracked by airborne and ground radars. The Belgian jets locked onto the objects for 5 seconds before the UFOs sped away at speeds that would have killed a human pilot.
It is impossible, even with a stealth aircraft, to accelerate within 1 second from 150 knots till 500 knots. That is for sure, because even the human body would not tolerate such an acceleration.
Thousands of witnesses, including the military and the police, reported sighting the UFOs. Consistent drawings of triangular objects were made by people scattered across the region. When authorities compared the sketches with eyewitness photos, the circle of evidence was complete. During this extraordinary press conference, Air Force Colonel Wilfrid de Brouwer confirmed the sightings of unidentified flying objects in Belgian airspace. It was the first time a Western government officially admitted that such an encounter had occurred. While military pilots as well as U.S. and Russian astronauts have reported UFO sightings, many more have been made by civilians who never gave UFOs a second thought.
There's a little sloop sailing north on the river.
Sam Gerard and his wife Alice live along the Hudson River just north of New York City. Gerard is a retired oceanographer and senior research associate of the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University. Alice is a former school administrator.
Yes. I really didn't know anything about UFOs before this incident. I thought they were most unlikely, and I didn't really believe in people who said they'd seen them until I saw one myself.
As a scientist, I was a complete agnostic. If I were to see one, I could then believe in it, but just to hear accounts of their existence was not any scientific proof as far as I was concerned.
On March 16, 1996, the Gerards were driving east on Veterans Memorial Highway. At 5:45 p.m., they saw a low-flying object through the trees.
We slowed down enough to determine that it was probably neither a helicopter nor a light plane.
Sam and Alice followed the object to Lake Tapan, where it hovered in one position high over the water. Sam made this sketch of a UFO covered with flashing lights.
You could see these lights even though it was a bright sun from the west and back of us.
It looked like a piece of junk jewelry because the lights didn't seem to be arranged regularly. They were sort of bright. They all seemed to me to be like electric light bulbs.
That were in the article in the paper that we...
Sam Gerard has designed instruments that were adapted for use during the Apollo project to the moon, but nothing in his experience explains the object he saw that afternoon.
I can state unequivocally that this was not a conventional aircraft, nor was it powered by any system that is understood even by people with a high level of understanding of technology.
Sam and Alice's encounter is the latest in a series of American sightings that began in a period following the Second World War. Clustered around a 2-week period in the late 1940s, reports came in from all 48 states.
The modern UFO era began in 1947 when Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot over Washington State, sighted a chain of objects skimming along over the mountaintops. And he said that they flew like a saucer does when you skip it across water. And that's the origin of the expression flying saucer.
And then there was the Roswell incident, the most controversial encounter in the history of the UFO phenomenon. In July of 1947, a local rancher named Mac Brazel discovered fragments of a metallic material spread over a 1/4 square mile of his land. It looked like a crash site. The fragments were turned over to officials at the Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomber Group. Roswell is now a civilian airfield, but for Air Corps veteran Walter G. Haught, it seems like only yesterday when he was summoned to the office of his commanding officer.
Well, that day of July the 8th, 1947, I was given information by Colonel William H. Blanchard, the commanding officer.
Haught, the base's public relations officer, was told by his boss that a UFO had crashed just outside Roswell.
And the release that he wanted me to put out and hand deliver to the 4 local media, in essence, stated that we had in our possession a flying disc. It was being flown to Higher Headquarters, 8th Air Force in Fort Worth by Major Jesse Marcel, who was our base intelligence officer.
While admitting it had recovered a UFO, the military never made mention of any alien bodies. But over the years, several airmen stationed at the base have testified that alien remains were held under tight security in this hangar. A mortician who worked in this Roswell funeral home testified that base personnel inquired about the availability of 4 child-sized coffins. And a nurse at the base hospital claimed to have witnessed surgeons performing an autopsy on beings that could not have been human. She was transferred overseas and disappeared. Then, just a day after the UFO press release, the same officers from the Roswell base denied that any alien aircraft had been recovered. According to the revised story, the wreckage found by Mac Brazel was from a weather balloon and not a flying saucer.
I was told by Colonel Blanchard, who I had all the faith in the world in, that we had in our possession a flying disc, and all of a sudden the general overrides it and says it wasn't. It was a weather balloon. I honestly in my own mind couldn't visualize Jesse Marcel, Major Marcel, the intelligence officer, making that big a blooper that he wouldn't know a weather balloon from something else, nor would Colonel Blanchard have not known that it was not a weather balloon. This was quite a revelation.
Nearly 50 years later, government officials insist no alien bodies were ever found and no wreckage ever recovered from a UFO crash. In 1994, a non-profit UFO group commissioned a detailed review of the Roswell incident using top-secret documents recently released by the U.S. government. It was prepared by Carl Flock, the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. His report has shocked many who believe in Roswell.
The project that I believe was responsible for the debris that was discovered by Rancher Mac Brazel and which led to the announcement of the capture of a flying saucer was a project codenamed Mogul. And it was classified top secret. It was very sensitive. It was a very high priority project. It was operated by a team from New York University.
Mogul was the code word for an experimental balloon designed to carry equipment high into the atmosphere. Its mission was to detect evidence of Soviet atom bomb tests. According to government records, Mogul balloons were being tested in New Mexico when one of them came down on Mac Brazel's cattle ranch. While Project Mogul explains the strange debris found on a cattle range, there's no explanation for the rumors of alien bodies. Carl Flock believes that it's time for the government to acknowledge whether any remains, alien or human, were ever held in secret at the base. Perhaps then, the Roswell incident can be truly put to rest. While UFO reports continue to come in from all over the world, one UFO phenomenon would confine itself almost entirely to the English countryside. Late in the 1970s, startling evidence of possible alien encounters emerged in the form of strange circular patterns on agricultural land. Every summer, more and more of these mysterious circles appeared on crop fields overnight. Speculation grew that the circles were the result of nocturnal landings by UFOs. Scientists and the media descended on the countryside as the number of crop circles multiplied.
There's a flattening. They're actually lying flat on the ground, like this one here, and these along here, look.
Yeah.
They're flat on the ground while there's others growing up right
That's
again.
right. Only in the ring.
Yes.
Over the years, the crop circles evolved from simple designs to elaborate glyph-like symbols. Some theorized they were extraterrestrial messages. A new branch of UFO study would seek to decipher their meaning. By 1993, the mystery had become a national obsession. But then two men stepped forward and admitted they were the perpetrators of an elaborate joke. Under the cover of darkness, using the simplest of tools, they had stomped their way into history with a spectacular hoax.
I'm Dave Chorley, this is Doug Barr, and we are the two people that have created the crop circles in 1978 through to today.
We started doing the patterns, and last year we did the first pictogram at the bottom of Cheesefoot Head, and that caused quite a sensation. And since then, the furor's got more and more and more. People from overseas coming over because it's something that's even away from the circles. It's more and more important, you see. And they're just scratching their heads. They're still scratching their heads 13 years later.
The incident provided the world with some comic relief, but other alleged UFO encounters are more serious and as yet unexplained. These are sketches of alien abductors made by their victims. Most report being confronted by UFOs emanating bright and paralyzing lights. Others claim to have been abducted from their cars and homes. When they return, they're unable to account for their whereabouts for hours or even days. Abductees say they're often restrained and subjected to painful physical tests, invasive procedures focused on sexual organs. Some people who claim to have been abducted exhibit round depressions called scoop marks, as if a layer of cells had been surgically removed from their bodies. Others suffer long cuts and straight-line gashes. Bud Hopkins has written 2 books on abductions and has interviewed hundreds of abductees.
You get very, very few hoaxes because a person is calling you saying, I don't know what happened to me, I might be losing my mind, I don't want you to call back to my house because I don't want my wife to know that I've talked to you, I don't know what's happening, etc. And they insist on anonymity and so forth. There's hardly the motivation for a hoaxer in that. There's no way that you cover yourself with glory.
I never thought about UFOs. It never really occurred to me at all about even their possibility until I was 17 and it was in my face and there was no way to avoid it.
Chris Hinton is a 42-year-old assistant building contractor in Washington, D.C. He provided this interview in hopes of helping other victims. Over the course of a week in the summer of 1972, Chris was helping his brother prepare for a driving test. Each night, they saw several UFOs in the sky.
You see a bright light over the horizon just shoot across the sky, lightning speed, and then stop suddenly on a dime. This voice explains, as this light projects off the side of the ship, we're hypnotizing you. And there's no need to be afraid, you just relax. And we are going to communicate telepathically.
Chris's teenage encounters triggered forgotten memories. Replays of other alien abductions that stretched back into his childhood years.
When I was 4 years old, I had been lost in the woods for several hours. And 2 figures about my size came up, one on either side of me from behind. And they said, "Will you come with us, Chris?" All I saw was a ramp. It looked like a metallic ramp that entered a doorway, and they put me on this table and they clamped my skull into like a vise of some sort. I remember I just couldn't move, and I saw this contraption. It was metallic, and they clamped it firm. I could not move. And they rammed something up the back of my head, and it hurt like the devil. I was screaming. And they packed me up and walked me out of the ship. And I'm running back home.
By 1992, stories like Chris's had become so widespread that a special conference was convened at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to investigate alien abductions. Sponsored by the Fund for UFO Research, It was attended by prominent scientists, abduction victims, and UFO researchers.
Studies have been conducted that show that abductees who don't know anything about the UFO subject, they don't know what other people have reported, still will come out with the identical story in exactly the same sequence.
But scientists at the conference wanted hard proof.
We hear tales of people being abducted. We hear heartfelt stories. These people are clearly affected by what they've imagined or seen or something, but we never get a real piece of evidence.
Bud Hopkins believes he's found the kind of evidence scientists are looking for here in Salt Lake City, Utah. This woman and her son had an abduction experience. To protect their privacy, they requested we mask their identities. Their ordeal began on a drive home from a family get-together.
And all of a sudden, we were hit by that bright light, just a bright light. That came from nowhere. I couldn't see the road. I knew I was moving. I looked over at him and I told him, I can't see the road. And that's the last of my memory.
My recollection is my mother let go of the steering wheel, and at that point I reached over and grabbed it.
I can't remember going home. I can't remember the next day.
Like many abductees, memories of intrusive alien surgery began to haunt Joan. A year later, an accident would reveal some extraordinary evidence.
I hit my head on the fireplace, and I was out unconscious for about 45 minutes. I woke up and made it to the phone and called my parents, and they came and took me to the hospital. And they x-rayed my head.
Suspecting, I suppose, a skull fracture,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, but there was no skull fracture. It was fine. But the doctor came running through ER yelling, "How did you get this metal in your head?" Well, I had no idea, neither did my parents. I've never had a head injury to where I could get metal in my brain.
The radiologist's report indicates an oval metallic object of unknown origin is lodged in the parasagittal region of the woman's brain. The official hospital report goes on to state, the appearance is unusual for an artifact, and certainly the pattern would be worthy of pursuit. Skeptics insist that reports of alien abductions are the product of some mass subconscious hysteria. But if they are fantasies, how do we explain the radiologist report? UFO researchers do share some common ground with the academic establishment. Just north of Boston, Massachusetts, the Billion-Channel Extraterrestrial Assay, or BETA project, is an ambitious scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence. A joint project of Harvard University and the Planetary Society of Pasadena, California. This radio telescope is listening for a signal from outer space. Nearly all objects in space generate various kinds of random radio waves. These waves are monitored by BETA on 250 million channels and translated into red and green spikes. If alien cultures are trying to communicate to other civilizations, a strong radio beacon would be a logical way to say hello. Should BETA spot an unusually strong and steady signal, its powerful computer would peg it as an alien radio beacon. Dr. Paul Horowitz of Harvard University directs the project.
Life elsewhere in the universe, guaranteed. Life elsewhere in our galaxy of 400 billion stars, guaranteed. Intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, guaranteed. Intelligent life elsewhere in our galaxy, so overwhelmingly likely that I'd give you any odds you like. I think the tough part is the intelligent life interested in communicating Are they sending messages by method that we can detect in our direction at a power level sufficient for us to detect?
Jeff Meldrum has returned from Bigfoot country to his lab in Idaho. He's back just in time. Preliminary tests on the Bigfoot hair sample have been completed with significant results. The hair strands from Northern California are strikingly similar to alleged Sasquatch samples from other states. DNA studies will soon compare the hair with samples taken from gorillas.
If in fact the DNA compares most closely to the living great apes, then it's strong evidence that that Bigfoot is in fact part of a very early ape lineage that gave rise to the modern living apes, such as chimps and gorillas.
The initial results of the DNA tests did confirm the hair samples from Northern California are of animal, not human origin, and are not of any species known to exist in North America. Some believe we will never find Bigfoot because it doesn't exist. They tell us there are no more mysterious creatures to be found on Earth. And yet, we keep finding them. In 1994, a new species of animal is captured in Vietnam. Called the saula, it's the largest new mammal to have been discovered in the past 50 years. That same year, another deer-like creature, the giant muntjac, is found in nearby Laos. In Antarctica, scientists uncover a meteor from Mars. In 1996, they announced that evidence of alien life forms is embedded in its surface. Based on these spectacular revelations, who can predict what unexplained mysteries await us still? Are we alone? No, not by any means. Will there be other encounters? The answer is yes. It's only a matter of time and space. We are at the intersection of life and death. Here we are confronted with the most profound questions of all. Does the waning of this life mark a final passage? Or is this the moment of transition to another state of being? Now the search for answers begins as Reader's Digest's Mysteries of the Unexplained presents Sacred Places and Mystic Spirits. It floats in an unimaginable abyss of darkness, a blue planet in the vastness of black space. Touched with a mystic spark of life in some ancient cosmic event, the Earth provided a nurturing cradle for life itself. From the dawn of human history, we have pondered the mysteries of existence and have called upon the awesome places of Earth for answers. In the shadow of these great monuments, our sense of the sacred was born. They inspired us, but questions still remained. In the end, we were driven to emulate the potent majesty of nature for ourselves. 5,000 years ago, our forebears labored to adorn the desert plateau of Giza with great pyramids. In Mesopotamia, spectacular ziggurats were built. In the New World, vast temples would transfigure the jungle. Deserts were etched with strange symbols and designs. And in Europe, the silent monoliths of Stonehenge were erected. The standing stones of Karnak raised. Do these monuments, built in different epochs and separated by thousands of miles, share a common purpose? Journalist and author Graham Hancock believes they do. He's traveled to a quiet corner of the northeastern United States, looking for evidence of an ancient science that once provided the motive and the meaning for the monuments our forebears left behind.
I think that what we're looking at is architecture connected to a science of immortality. The fundamental obsession of the ancient world was not with this life, but with life after death.
Seeking a pattern forged in stone, a pattern repeated over and over again across the globe, Hancock has explored many of the sacred sites of the ancient world.
All around the world, we have sites made of enormous blocks of stone and incorporating precise alignments. You can go to Stonehenge and find precisely the same alignment with the winter solstice sunrise there. Karnak, Avebury, in Europe. These are all part of a system designed to facilitate the passage of the soul from life into death.
Evidence for this ancient science may exist where it's least expected, even on the borders of New Hampshire and Vermont. The entrance to this ancient stone structure, like Karnak and Stonehenge, is oriented to the path taken by the sun at the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. According to Hancock, this structure is one more link in a chain of knowledge that reaches back into the depths of time.
We don't know who built them. We really don't understand how they were built. They don't tell us anything about themselves. We're left to wonder why they were built.
Hancock believes the science the ancients incorporated into their monuments has been lost, perhaps beyond recovery. But here, in the bygone world of the Celts and Druids, we can still find witnesses to that earlier tradition.
They absolutely knew that life was a preparation for death, for the great adventure that lies beyond death, and that there were things, specific things, that had to be done in this life in order to be ready for the life beyond.
Rivers, springs, and lakes were all sacred to the Druids. These places were like doorways between the living and the dead. And at these points of passage, they offered gold jewelry, valuable weaponry, and silver chalices to their gods. Nothing was so precious that it could not be sacrificed. In 1984, a window into this vanished world would open. A severed human foot was discovered on the conveyor belt of a peat processing company near the English town of Lindau Moss. It was the first in a series of clues that would lead to an even more startling discovery. Deep within the ancient marshland, the mummified body of a man had lain hidden for 2,000 years. The body became known as the Lindau Man.
It was 12 years ago when I first came to Lindau Moss, the day after a well-preserved human foot had been found at the depot of the peat company who worked this site, just a few hundred yards from where we are now. As the local archaeologist, I've been invited to come out and explore the site the following day. And I walked out to almost where we're standing now, and to my amazement, poking out from near the base of one of these sections was a flap of skin, well-preserved human skin. The body we now know as Lindau Man.
The Lindau Man was uncannily well preserved. His skin was smooth and supple. Even his eyelashes could still be seen.
He had neatly trimmed hair, a neatly trimmed beard, so he obviously took care of his appearance. His fingernails, which we found, were wonderfully smooth. Even under the microscope they looked smooth.
This intimate evidence convinced archaeologists he was a man of the highest rank.
Which is...
But what had brought him to this fate?
Above the ligature mark, it's almost exactly
A forensic
2 inches
pathologist mapped the final moments of the Lindau Man's life.
And
it was a remarkable sequence of events, one that ended in human sacrifice.
Well, it looks like a cutting wound rather than something which has been produced after death.
Step by step, the sacrificial rites of the Druids have been reconstructed, just as they unfolded 2 millennia ago. The victim was taken to a sacred grove in preparation for the 3 ritual stages of Druidic human sacrifice. First, a strong cord of animal sinew was knotted around his neck and tightened. Then came 2 savage blows to the head. Finally, a knife was used to sever an artery in his neck.
He may have been a princely figure, a warrior, or he may have been a prisoner of war who had been kept for this purpose. But it could easily be someone who went willingly. The Celts believed in reincarnation. Death to them was not such an obstacle as it is to us. So perhaps for the benefit of the tribe, this person went willingly to be sacrificed.
Two hours north of London is a 400-year-old hotel with a long history of hauntings. Today it's called the Bell Hotel, but in the 19th century it was called the Ancient House and belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Radcliffe. According to legend, when Elizabeth was murdered in her bedroom by a stable hand, her daughter committed suicide in what is now room number 10. At the murder trial, the shocked townsfolk learned the reason. The stable hand was having an affair with both the mother and the daughter. For more than a century since, guests staying at the hotel have reported seeing a young woman's ghost in the room where the suicide occurred. To examine the latest of these claims, the Reader's Digest commissioned a special investigating team. The leader, Tony Cornell, is a 30-year member and investigator with the British Society for Psychical Research. Dr. Judith Coney of London University accompanies him as an observer.
Which way is it?
And the man who most recently experienced the haunting, Colin Mitchell, provides eyewitness information in precise details.
You could feel the cold spot. It was like ice.
All the way down the corridor?
No, just in one
Just here?
confined space.
Right,
You could literally move in and out of it.
Right. And then what happened?
A video cameraman records the investigation.
Here we are in room 10.
Okay. This is the room?
This is the room.
Right.
Colin Mitchell spent 3 nights in room number 10. He recalls a rising tempo of paranormal events.
Yeah.
This brass knocker moved on its own.
You could see it?
See it and hear it. Yeah.
On that first night, a strange glow appeared in one corner, and the next morning, handprints appeared on the interior surface of the plate glass protecting the ancient plaster walls.
Right.
The television.
And in the same corner of the room, the antenna cable of the television appeared to move of its own accord.
That sort of motion. If we move over to the bed. On one of the mornings, I had the sensation of the bed being tucked in underneath me.
But it was on his last night that his most remarkable sighting occurred.
I woke up one morning and roughly here, there was a young girl of around, I'd say, 13 years of age. She was blonde, long white dress, etc.
Standing about here?
Yeah, she stood there, she walked from there across to the front of the table and disappeared. The second time that I actually saw her, she was sitting on the end of the bed. She got up and I felt the bed move as she got up. And this time she was actually looking at me. She walked around again, walked to the table and disappeared again.
It's this phantom apparition that Tony Cornell is here to find.
Walked to the table and disappeared again.
Why do ancient homes and castles provide the setting for so many ghostly tales? Is it a kind of memory contained within these dusty chambers that puts a chill into our bones? Could powerful human emotions, even the horror of a single moment, have left some trace behind? According to researchers, ghosts and apparitions are indeed the product of violent and terrible actions committed in the past. It's a theory called psychic imprinting. It may explain why ghosts have been reported in so many places around the world. Here, for instance, deep in the Auvergne region of southern France, is the Château de Vos, a place that harbors memories of a love gone tragically awry. In the 16th century, the lord of the chateau seduced a young woman named Lucy. His wife, discovering the adultery, demanded immediate revenge. Lucy was brutally murdered. Baron de la Tour, the present owner, has no doubt that the terrible event still haunts his castle.
The last time that I saw it, I saw a little light. And after a while, I saw the light in all its power. And I saw within that light the shadow of a human form.
As the Baron walks the empty corridors of his chateau late into the night, it's easy to imagine that Lucy might still be there. Tales of the supernatural are almost commonplace among Europe's ancient homes. But certain sites seem overburdened by all the history they have seen. Standing on the border of England and Scotland, Chillingham Castle's 1,000-year history is stained by bloody deeds. Its foundations rest on the ruins of a 7th century abbey that was besieged and pillaged long ago. The monks who did not escape were slaughtered where they stood. The present owner, Sir Humphrey Wakefield, believes they still walk the North Tower of Chillingham Castle, that their agitated spirits are embedded in its ancient stones and walls.
They'll have been cut up and strangled and thrown down wells, their property stolen, and everything else. So you can imagine there were lots of angry spirits floating around from those times.
These are not the only phantoms rumored to haunt the castle's halls. The terrible grief of a young woman seems to have endured for centuries here. She has become known as the Lady in White.
The White Lady, she was wandering, looking for her husband, one of the earls that controlled this place. Sometimes she'd be seen walking up and down the stairs along the passages.
Her husband, according to legend, ran off with a younger sister, the Lady Henrietta Barclay. And despite her pitiful entreaties, neither sister nor husband would ever set eyes on her again. But the most famous ghost of Chillingham Castle was the Radiant Boy. His keening voice once terrified many an unsuspecting guest.
Radiant Boy appeared for a few hundred years, and we don't quite know who he was, but again he appeared many times, and he would come out of a wall in what is now the Pink Room.
For 200 years, the ghostly figure of the Radiant Boy was an often witnessed presence. But at the turn of this century, the sightings would suddenly cease.
When they cleared out the chimney, that plasterwork fell out to reveal the bones of a child.
The child's identity remains a mystery. We only know that the Lord of the Manor chose his own ancestral chapel as the burial place for the bones. As for the haunting voice of the Radiant Boy, it was never heard again.
Well, now look, here we've got a plan of room 10.
The investigating team is gathered in a suite at the Bell Hotel.
All this phenomena.
They're here to review the evidence and develop the best strategy for securing their ultimate objective: concrete evidence of a ghost.
And sees a girl of about 13.
A special model has been prepared, accurate in every detail, to identify best placement of cameras and sensors.
One or two things. The room goes cold, they hear some footsteps. Yeah. But in this particular case, I had 15 different...
The case is complex because of the unusually large number of paranormal events. Both Dr. Cornell and Dr. Coney have many unanswered questions.
Did he believe in ghosts when...
No, he didn't. No, that's another interesting
wife.
thing. Both he and his wife didn't believe in ghosts at all. And their attitude was absolute rubbish.
Really what it was about.
Perhaps, too, there were other more rational explanations for the events that Colin experienced.
Right.
In those moments between waking and sleeping, sometimes, for instance, people have a feeling that they're falling.
But how actually
Right.
can you explain then the feeling of a sheet hitting your face, coming down, hitting your face, coming down, and then the feeling that the sheets are being tucked in?
I can't, except to say that's the interpretation that you put on the event, and I don't know whether that's actually happened.
No, what I'm saying is here, how can you explain the fact that sheets are tucked in underneath you?
So actually when you looked, you saw the sheets tightly tucked in.
You felt...
Strange behaviour for a ghost, isn't it? Well,
Simply unbelievable or genuinely uncanny.
No, but...
The investigation continues.
I know what you mean.
Are they as frightened of us as we are supposedly of them?
Since time immemorial, mankind has been fascinated by death. Is there a soul, an essence that survives? Can we bridge the deep chasm that separates the living from the dead? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, questions such as these would fuel a worldwide movement known as spiritualism. Spiritualists stressed the idea of personal communication with the dead. A mourning widow, they believed, could still speak to her beloved. For the recently bereaved, spiritualism offered more than consolation. It provided a continuing lifeline to the deceased.
You were not talking to some disembodied spirit, you were talking to the spirit of your aunt, your father, your mother, your lost child.
In the golden age of spiritualism, it was widely accepted that certain people with special gifts could communicate with the dead. They were called mediums. Their most celebrated ritual was the seance. In the semi-darkness, hands were joined, minds were focused, and the bereaved waited for the moment when the medium became a channel for a spirit of the dead. In the gloom of the seance chamber, anything seemed possible. People saw visions of dead loved ones, tables lifted of their own accord. Yet for many spiritualists, all these strange manifestations were quite beside the point.
When people go to seances, most of the time what they are looking for is reassurance, and the kind of reassurance they're looking for is, first of all, that their loved ones have moved on to another plane of existence, and secondly, of course, that they, in their turn, will do the same.
But spiritualism is not the only way in which people have sought contact with the dead. There are other, darker paths.
There was also a long occult tradition by which the spirits, demons, or whatever you call them, could be coerced into doing our will. We, as humans, could control them. But this was parallel, it was never part of the spiritualist movement.
In the early part of this century, one man's name became synonymous with the occult: Aleister Crowley. He called himself the Beast. Only in his 20s, he became a leader in a mysterious organization dedicated to reviving ancient rituals and magic arts. But the so-called Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn proved too restrictive. He broke away to found his own secret society and learn the blackest of evil arts. Crowley courted the darkest of all powers, seeking to penetrate the veil that separates the living from the dead. Rumors of drug abuse and perverse sexual practices swirled around him. Finally, his dark ambition drove him to the brink of madness. Denounced by the media as the wickedest man in the world, abandoned by both followers and friends, the beast died penniless in England. Meanwhile, more sober approaches to the world of magic and spiritualism were emerging. A group of well-known physicists, philosophers, and psychologists founded the BSPR, the British Society for Psychical Research. They conducted the first genuinely scientific investigations of spiritualist and other paranormal claims. The magnesium flashes of their cameras revealed fakery where phantoms were once seen. And for the first time, the medium's own photographs were properly examined. What the images revealed was evidence not of spiritualist powers, but of double exposures and clear and deliberate fraud. The rationalist researchers of the BSPR debunked each and every medium they examined. But the hard-bitten skeptics of the BSPR did not dismiss all psychic phenomena. Even today, its members believe that some events remain unexplained.
We've got some new equipment this time, which should be interesting. We've got a thermal camera here, which we're going to put in the room, I think in that area there. It picks up differences in temperature. Put it on like this. Now, you can see if I pointed at Colin, you can see that he's got a red face. That's the heat. It'll come round to you like that, don't you see? So it shows your temperature thing. What we'll do is we'll put it in the room. It'll pick out, doubtless, Colin if he's in the bed. And if there's a ghostly figure walking across, or an area that shows a difference in temperature, then we can concentrate upon that. Let's get these things laid out. Now what we want to do, you have one of these, and help me put this down. She walks that way, you put one down there, and we'll put one here.
What, trigger with movement?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So if she walks through there, it'll set them off.
Right.
We've got a temperature gauge here. We've also got her sound. If she makes a creaking noise on the board, that light will come on. We'll put that up there, shall we?
Right.
We're facing there.
Okay.
So if there's any noise of the kind of that she's supposed to make on the floorboards,
that'll
that light
come
will
on.
go on.
Great.
Then we've got here, we've got the thermal camera. We've got the infrared camera here.
And that's facing the bed.
That's it, and that's on a time lapse.
Right.
And then we've got the thermal camera there that will show us any changes in temperature in the room. So we're pretty well all set. Shall we go in and look at the monitors now?
Brilliant.
Jolly good.
Okay.
Let's try it.
Let's see what we can see.
Jolly good.
There is a phenomenon similar to a haunting, but even more capricious and unpredictable. Some people consider it the effect of a playful or troubled household spirit. Others are convinced there's no external mechanism at all. They believe these strange occurrences are the unconscious projection of an individual mind. Whatever the cause, it's called a poltergeist. In the late 1960s, two physicists from the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics in Munich studied an extraordinary series of physical phenomena that took place in the Bavarian town of Rosenheim. As this dramatized reenactment from Dutch television shows, the case quickly became sensationalized. Still, some of the facts do check out. A young German girl named Anne-Marie Schneider did begin a new job in a downtown office. And with her arrival, a series of strange and inexplicable events were reported. But did the lamp above her head really gyrate? Did the phones ring with an announcement that it was 5 o'clock, time for Anne-Marie to leave? And as the clock sped forward, did the place explode? Putting poltergeist reports to the test is never easy. While investigating scientists concluded the ordinary laws of physics couldn't account for the reported phenomena, the sensational nature of the case made it hard to separate the science from the fiction. Still, the events that took place in this ordinary little row house in Enfield, England, were so well documented that a fair assessment may yet be possible. In 1977, Miss Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, lived with her 2 young daughters in this small house.
The case actually started when the mother called upstairs and she said, you know, go to sleep. And what happened was that the piece of furniture moved, and she actually saw it moved, and she pushed it back and it moved again. Well, from then onwards, of course, it was chaos.
Morris Gross, then a new member of the British Society for Psychical Research, was called in to investigate the case.
I was certain in my own mind the case was genuine, and when I got there I was sure that it was. Small objects started to fly around, Lego bricks particularly. They called in a priest, they called in a medium, and eventually they called in the Daily Mirror.
The Daily Mirror sent in a young photographer named Graham Morris. At first, he was as convinced as Morris Gross.
So I was dispatched with a reporter to the house. Things were just very, very quickly flying across the room. And I was watching each person in turn to see if they were doing anything. And they weren't. They were just as horrified as I was. And still there were things just taking off and flying across the room, people ducking, women screaming, men screaming. You know, everyone was horrified by what was going on.
The Enfield poltergeist became a sensation, but as newspapers across the country picked up the story, doubts began to arise in Morris's mind.
My belief in the whole case, I think, really changed over the time I was there. Things that were happening in the house the next day were in the paper. It turned it almost into a bit of a circus.
One of the most sensational elements of the case was the so-called levitation photograph, taken by Morris with a remote-controlled camera. It shows Janet in midair with her sister screaming. It was immediate front-page material.
Investigators were convinced this was levitation. Looked to me like a young girl jumping out of bed, but
it's a very real phenomenon. There's no question about that at all. Anybody who says that it's by people's imaginations are talking rubbish.
I'm sorry, they still just look like a girl jumping out of bed to me.
But the case broke wide open with Gross's discovery of the ghost voice, a spirit voice speaking through Janet.
Come on, let me hear you say my name. That's not my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it. Morris.
First of all, I thought it was discarnate voice, that is, coming from nowhere. But eventually I realised it was coming from the girl Janet. And when I challenged her, I said, Janet, that voice is coming from you. She says, oh, no, it's not. I said, if it's not coming from you, Janet, where's it coming from? And we taped her mouth completely up. And it still spoke.
I'm invisible. So much G-H-O-S-T.
There was so much evidence from the actual person who claimed to be speaking through Janet that he did live in that house. He explained through the voice the manner of his death, and we knew that to be correct.
I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that kids like doing. It seemed like good fun to mimic and just please adults more than anything. If they can get a bit of attention, that's fine. But it wasn't very convincing.
If anybody says to me they don't believe it, well, I say to them, well, that's your problem. It's not my problem. I've experienced it. It's happened to me. If you don't believe it, well, either try and find out something more about the subject or keep quiet.
Once more, the surveillance camera sweeps the room. The equipment seems to be working perfectly. It's very late. We're in the dead of night.
Watching the monitors, we've got full cover of the room. I tell you what is interesting, and that's the thermal camera there, see? It gives a totally different picture in many ways, a different slant on the problem we've got.
So if something goes very cold in the room, what should the colour be?
Well, supposing a ghost sucks the energy from the room to create itself, and it's colder than the surrounding area.
Now Tony Cornell and company must wait and wonder, will the ghost appear? Can such an apparition be recorded? In many parts of the world, the passage from life to death is not imagined as a final journey. For the followers of Buddhism, it's merely a brief interruption in the unending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that all living things must endure. According to the tenets of Tibetan Buddhism, we are all reincarnations of other beings. Moreover, Buddhists believe that past lives can be recalled. In countries where reincarnation is part of the culture, people often report memories of past lives. But one case in particular proved so remarkable that it caught the world's attention.
I think one of the most impressive cases on record is the case of Titu Singh, who was a little Indian boy, and when he was about 5 or 6, he talked about a past life as a man called Suresh Varma, and he could remember being shot and killed.
Titu's vivid memory of this violent event prompted a search for evidence to support his incredible claim. It was soon discovered that on the very day of his birth, a robbery had gone terribly wrong. In a warehouse just a few miles from the boy's birthplace, a panicking thief had opened fire on one of the workers. The gunman's victim, a man named Suresh Varma. He was killed by a single shot to the head. What sets this case apart is that the young boy's claim of reincarnation is supported by physical evidence. 2 birthmarks, one on the brow and one on the back of his head.
When the autopsy report is compared to the birthmarks on his head, it is found that the birthmarks on his head are exactly in the same position as the bullet wounds in the head of Suresh Varma. Not only that, but the wounds are slightly different in size, and they are exactly the same as the entry and the exit wound on the person he remembers. So physical marks are something that provide another degree of evidence above past life recall.
The parents of the murdered man have become frequent visitors to the home of T2 Singh. They are convinced that T2 Singh is the reincarnation of their dead son.
We need to open more people's minds to the possibility that we are more than just this body, that we should be thinking more about what will happen to us in the future. Reincarnation says we come back into other bodies over a series of lifetimes, and the purpose of that is to learn more lessons and evolve as beings. So whether the Tibetan Buddhists are right or the Hindus are right or whether we're right, doesn't really matter. I see it as a natural, universal law that will take effect regardless.
But right now I'd like your unconscious mind.
In the West, some people also believe they can explore past lives and former incarnations.
Your previous lifetime as Melissa.
Miles Austin is a hypnotist who uses past life regression as a therapeutic technique.
Well, they're showing me something that they're going to do to my hands.
Past life regression therapy is actually a fairly straightforward form of therapy where we regress someone or put them into a trance state and then very gently take them back to a previous life.
Being held back.
Carol Lawson used to suffer from a debilitating and mysterious affliction of her hands. After a series of failed remedies, she turned to regression therapy.
It's okay, now just step back.
We went back, we didn't quite know where we were going to go, we didn't know what we were going to find, we didn't know if it was going to work. And we eventually found this person called Melissa.
Tell me what
and through a series of questions from Miles, we found that it was 1608.
How are they taking me down these steps and I don't want to go?
Mm-hmm. Suddenly the breathing rate increased dramatically, facial muscles changed, and there was an enormous amount of movement with Carol's hands.
Ow, I've been caught. Ow, and he's pulling my hair.
It's okay.
But even now, when under hypnosis, Carol seems able to revisit a time of terrible torture. She's convinced these events really happened, but in a former life.
It was just intensely emotional and very, very powerful. Almost, I mean, it was a situation that sent shivers down my spine when I was actually going through it. But it was something that we had to go through. We had to change that memory and relax.
Carol's descriptions of her former life cannot be verified.
Going all over you.
Her hands, however, are completely healed.
And we've actually got nothing. What do you think?
Nothing on the monitors.
Nothing on the monitor.
What about the instruments?
It's the following day. Tony Cornell and Judith Coney are comparing notes.
Well, there was reaction, but there was nothing.
A careful review of the previous night's recordings has revealed no evidence of a ghost.
Inside the normal range you'd expect. Why do I continue? Because there's something there that's got to be explained. And it's no good just saying it's a too difficult problem to deal with, because the human mind wants an answer to these things. So I keep plugging away. It's an unsolved mystery, and it's still a challenge.
The vast majority of societies have beliefs relating to life after death. So you could argue that because everybody seems to believe in it, except for the most technological, urbanized societies where everyone gets very rational and scientific about it, there must be some truth in it. Otherwise, why would there be all these beliefs?
I believe that it is something that can't be explained. It is something that is there at certain times. Maybe all of the time, but not in a physical form. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever. It was a young girl, 12, 13 years of age, long white dress, garlands in her hair, And she was there. She was as real as a physical person.
Colin believes that he witnessed a presence that somehow had cheated death.
It was real. It was there. And I think I'll always say that. In my mind, it was there. It was real.
Colin's testimony is based on observation. In some cases, however, it's the actual experiencing of death's aftermath that forms the basis of belief. Seeking the truth in tales from beyond the grave is an uncertain business. Certainly, if anything invites our skepticism, it's stories of voodoo priests and their powers over the waking dead, the zombies of the island of Haiti. But even here, truth may prove stranger than Hollywood's wildest fictions. This man's name is Clervius Narcisse. He was filmed by a BBC camera crew in Haiti in 1981. 18 years before, he had been buried in this now empty grave. According to hospital records, he had been declared dead on May 5, 1962. Years later, an amazed relative would discover him dazed and confused, working in an isolated village. Forensic experts from Scotland Yard examined the fingerprint evidence. Finally, the authorities announced their findings. Clervius Narcisse may have been buried, but he had never died. He was instead a zombie. The zombie phenomenon is clearly more than myth. American anthropologist Wade Davis has unlocked many of the secrets of voodoo.
By voodoo definition, a zombie is an individual who has had their soul stolen by sorcery, brought into the grave, somehow magically resuscitated from the grave in this passage of death, and then is reinvigorated by the magic of the sorcery to be led away to an uncertain fate, a fate that is almost always said to involve enslavement.
Davis has discovered that the voodoo priests have developed a poison capable of rendering a person paralyzed and, to all appearances, dead. A helpless victim can only watch in horror as the rituals of death and burial are performed.
If the chemical hypothesis is correct, he goes through a rather extraordinary experience. He's not poisoned. He's brought onto a state of apparent death. His metabolism goes low, he is paralyzed, and yet consciousness is retained.
Clervius Narcisse was buried alive. In the dead of night, a voodoo priest returned to the graveyard to revive and then enslave him. It was almost 20 years before his liberty was regained. A 1,000 miles from Haiti lives a songwriter and composer who can truly celebrate her freedom. Yet, like Clervius Narcisse, she too has returned from the dead. To protect her privacy, we will call her Mary Hartman. In 1990, doctors discovered a swollen arterial blood vessel, an aneurysm deep within her brain. Only an extraordinary medical procedure, the hypothermic cardiac arrest operation, saved her life. To prepare for surgery, Mary's core body temperature was lowered by 40 degrees. A cardiopulmonary bypass was performed. Her heart and her breathing ceased. The surgeon then opened up her cranium and drained the blood from her brain. There was no longer any detectable brainwave activity.
our doctor gave us a very complete understanding that even though they were going to take my life, they did intend to put it back. So that's what they did. They stopped my heart, they drained my blood, they froze me. And this had the effect of shrinking the aneurysm, which is full of blood.
It's incredible because during that short period of time when the blood is drained out of the head, there's no heartbeat, no respiration, the body temperature is 58 degrees Fahrenheit.
Dr. Michael Sabom is a cardiologist, but his interest in Mary's case goes beyond the realm of medicine. Mary's recollections have reinforced his belief in what he'd once dismissed: near-death experiences.
Mary met all of the criteria necessary to declare a person dead. The only difference, obviously, between Mary and someone who's dead is that Mary came back.
The highly unusual thing that happened while I was having that procedure is I came out of the body. The minute I came out of the body, everything was wonderful. No pain, no heavy baggage to carry around, total freedom. It was wonderful. I realized that that was my dead body lying on the table, but it was okay. That was fine. If that's the way it was supposed to be, that was fine. The next thing that I was aware of was something began to pull me. And as I was being pulled, I distinctly heard my grandmother call me, and I immediately went to her. She was wearing light. Everyone that I was with was wearing light, as if it was clothing, seemed to emanate from them. It was alive, and this light was all over everyone there. And I do remember thinking, I'm standing in the breath of God. And I ran into all kinds of people. I ran into 2 people I didn't even know had passed away on the other side. Most of them I was related to. They were family members, and I knew many of them. But there were many, many, many more that I did not know. They knew me. There was some kind of connection. They knew me. There came a time when I was to return to the body, and my uncle brought me back. And that was okay. I knew I was going back. That was all right. But when I got back and I looked at the body, I didn't want to get in it at all. It looked kind of like a train wreck, and I knew it was going to hurt a lot. And I had the sensation of being pushed, like whoosh, back into the body. Immediately, I felt like I'd been pushed into a pool full of ice water. I don't know what it means. What it means to me is, regardless of what caused it, it was a wonderful, healing experience that taught me that there is nothing at all to be fearful about in dying, the natural process of death. Regardless of where you sit on this issue, it doesn't matter, does not matter. For me, rising up out of that body and feeling that perfect peace and harmony with the entire world, being able to carry a goodly bit of that back with me. I can only say wonderful things about dying, wonderful things. Nothing to fear, nothing at all to fear.
We are a much more mysterious creature than we imagine. We really don't understand the nature of the universe in which we live. Strangely, if you look at the ancient texts, what they repeatedly say is that this life is the illusion, and the life beyond is the reality that we should come to know.
Is there life after death? Did the ancients succeed in unlocking this mystery, only to have their knowledge lost in the course of time? Perhaps there are still secrets waiting to be deciphered in the hidden order of the stones. But in the face of such unexplained mysteries, we may have to make a choice between science and belief.